Welcome to another segment of Meeting. I'm Dawn Morgan. Thank you for listening. Meeting is brought to you by Baja Broadband Connect to Life. And this is a one-of-a-kind show. This show is going to focus on Gary Sevier, our longtime employee. It goes back, predates even me, and I feel like I've been around here forever, but in a good way. We're going to get to know Gary and to talk about the old days, a little bit about the good days, and just experiences in an anniversary year. Gary, thank you for agreeing to do this show.
The man, the legend.
The myth.
Nah, it's just Gary.
It's just Gary. The myth. That's a great liner. And that was, did you write it or did they come up? Okay, no?
That came from somewhere. I'm not sure.
I think T.J. Miracle wrote that then. I didn't know if you had a hand in that or not. But that was done for your anniversary year, which last year, 2013, was actually your 40th year in broadcasting.
As best I can figure, I started in 73. Sometimes it all gets a little murky when you go back that many years, but
right.
I think it was 73. Might have been early 74, somewhere in there.
Right. Has it been with Noalmark Broadcasting the entire time?
No, actually, when I first began, you remember that those were all of the transmitters, or the transmitter. We just had the little AM station at the time. Were in mobile homes out in Humboldt City. They were just mobile homes that had been bricked over and became radio stations. So we had a little AM station in there. That was even before FM was a big deal. Everybody said FM was something that would never fly. And back in the early 70s.
I believe, was that KCIA?
It was Crossroads International Airport.
Oh, okay. I wondered how they came up with that.
The owners at the time back then had thought that the old airbase out here was going to become an airport.
Right.
Crossroads International Airport. They had designs on that, or at least that was the story that I heard, and that's where those original call letters came from, KCIA.
And it was an AM station, AM 1110, is that right?
Correct.
And it became KYKK, and then just recently has become an AM with an FM translator, and actually changed the call letters. KYKK has moved over to a frequency that used to be KPER. So we've done a lot of musical chairs over the years, but it all began for you back at KCIA AM at what's Humboldt City, which back in the day, Humboldt City and just north of that, the transmitter was actually located just north of what is or was Humboldt City. It was actually more of a going concern. It was a little community.
Yes, it actually had its own. My grandmother was the postmistress at the post office in Humboldt City for a lot of years. And they thought that would turn into something, and therefore, I guess, it had associated that with the airport out there as well, too.
Right.
So,
and it has since lost its designation as they don't even have a zip code for it anymore. It used to have a zip code.
Just a few homes left out there.
Right, and that's it. And then our transmitter is out there. There's more stuff around that now than there ever was, though it's more populated all around it. There's a church.
Sadly, the old mobile homes are gone. I have memories of doing the morning show out there, and for some reason, the heater in the wintertime would never stay lit.
Oh, great.
So when you came in the morning, and of course, being an AM, it was just a sun-up to sundown station. They turned it off whenever it got dark. So you would come in the mornings, and it would be just frigid in there, and you would have to go through all kinds of rigmarole to get the heater to light.
Right.
It would be 30, 45 minutes before you could take your jacket and your cap off.
And by the time it really got to good and warm, it was time to leave. It was the show was over, right?
Yes, it was an experience sometimes.
I want to take you back maybe to the beginnings of broadcasting and why you got in it, and just talk briefly about something that I know. Just go back to when you were growing up. Was broadcasting, even remotely in your mind about something as a career that you'd be doing?
Back in the late 60s and early 70s in Lovington, when they had a cable system there, they had a little TV show that they would let high school students do in the afternoons. And there was a girl who ran
there's got to
the
be a girl.
show.
I know there's a girl in this story. There's got to be a girl in this story, right?
Well, she invited me in one evening to talk about something that was going on, and she was impressed with my ability to relate and communicate. And she always told me, even back then, before I'd graduated from high school, that you should think about a career in journalism or broadcasting of some kind. But I blew it off. There were bigger and better things, when you're in high school.
Oh yeah, you were actually born where?
In Hobbs.
In Hobbs, you were
I'm a
born.
native, yes.
Really? I didn't know. All these years I've known you and worked here. I didn't know that you were born in Hobbs. Wow.
Definitely.
At
And
the
that's a beauty of working in radio as well. There have been people from all over the world and all over the United States that have passed through here. So
Right.
it's been a real experience as far as meeting everyone.
You were born. I was born in Hobbs as well. Back at the time, the hospital was where the Good Samaritan Village is or was until it just recently closed. The same hospital where you were born.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. And then, but you went to school in Lovington. Is that
I did.
right?
Graduated high school, a couple of years at the junior college, and then a girl that I had gone to school with was working at the radio station, answering the phone and doing their commercial logs.
Oh, okay.
She would fill out the commercial logs.
Right.
Back in those days, you literally had to sit down and write out
Right.
every commercial that was bought, and you had to do the logs
Right.
by hand.
By hand, right.
Yeah.
We had to figure out, and I remember I trained to do traffic here at the station and had to fill in a couple of times when the girls who were doing traffic were gone for illness or other. And I learned how to do those. But yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing how far our industry has come, where we are now as compared to where we were. I don't know about you, it makes me feel even more ancient because you think that means it's just that much more time that's gone by. Really, it's just the incredible advances in the industry. The technology changes have been so quick that no, it's not a matter of how many years and decades it's been necessarily.
Since the 80s in particular,
crazy.
It's just exploded.
Yeah, and we could hardly get used to one system or one way of doing things, and then it was changing on us. We would go from cart, putting music from albums, playing either albums directly or putting them on cart, and then going from that to cassette, from that to CDs, and from CDs to digital music playing from the computers. It's amazing.
It's all been good in my mind. I mean,
Yeah.
I love the digital onslaught. It's so much easier these days than it was back in the good old days. 1971 graduated.
Okay.
And about 2 years after that, a girl that I went to school with, Tabitha Gregory was her name, she called me and said, I am moving away. I work at the radio station out here at Humble City, and I think that it would be great if you were to take my job. And she said, I've done a good job for these people, and I think they'll listen to me if I recommend you for the job. Would you like to try it?
Yeah.
And I said, well, sure. It sounds like fun.
Yeah.
So when I first
did it really?
began-
Is that something you really did? You thought, hey, this is cool.
It's like,
Yeah.
just like every starstruck kid, I was infatuated with radio and being a broadcaster. But when I first started out there was no broadcasting involved for me. I was just doing clerical work. I was filling out the commercial logs, answering the phone, and
You didn't do anything on the air?
no,
Or not
to
even
begin with.
Not even
And
commercials? What we call production.
No, at that time it was all strictly
Wow.
clerical, and
Yeah.
and I would guess it was almost a year at least, probably, before I got an opportunity to go on the air.
Yeah.
And that was when they hired a new program director to come in out there. And his wife would call for him fairly often.
Okay.
And I would answer the phone, and she'd say, you know what, you just sound so good over the phone. I'm going to ask my husband if there's something that you could do on the air.
Gary, it sounds like you owe your broadcasting career in very large part to women,
And
to very
I
kind,
can't
insightful
remember
women.
her name. I don't.
That's
But
funny.
she did put a bug in his ear, and he
Right.
said, back in those days, we got our news off of the teletype. And some people might not even know what I'm talking about. But it's
yeah.
those huge clacking,
Yes, they
clattering,
were so loud.
smells like oil
They
dinosaurs.
look like jukeboxes, is basically. They look like a big jukebox. When you went into broadcasting, it was actually a couple of years after you had graduated from high school.
Right.
All right. When you were in high school, you played football, and you were a star. I did not know you. You were slightly older than I was in school. Not much, but slightly older. But I have heard people talk about the fact that they had seen you play, they watched you, and that you were a very good football player. And I believe that because you're an excellent play-by-play broadcaster for football and basketball. I've heard you do both sports, and I think that's great. And that probably comes from having played the game. But
that comes from spending some time on the sideline, too, though. Yeah. I was just good enough to play.
Oh, really?
No, I don't think star would fit very well. But, loved sports, so it just seemed natural. And
what position were you?
Defensive cornerback.
Okay.
And I owe a lot of that, too, to a guy named Lynn Ruby, who was actually working out at Humboldt City when I started out there.
Yeah.
And he had been in Lovington. He was actually calling the game the night that I broke my neck when we were playing against Seminole in the 60s.
Okay.
And so I ended up, he was my tutor as far as sports play-by-play was concerned, a really good guy. He actually taught me on air as well, too. He was working on the air and doing sports out at Humboldt City when I started out there. And he, too, was a big sports guy. He was in professional baseball, had
Lynn Ruby, he was?
Yes, he was.
Really?
I can't remember now, and I should, what organization he was playing for, but he pitched for them and just never really was able to break into the big time.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I think what brought him to Hobbs was when they used to have so many years ago a semi-pro team that played here in Hobbs.
Yeah. The Conquistadors, I believe, is that what they were called?
Maybe. Your memory's better than mine.
I had a couple of uncles.
I have vague remembrances of the stadium. I think it was out there where Broadway and Marlin meet.
Exactly. It was a kind of in that little triangle right there. I watched many games there. I had two uncles who actually played for that team, and I was just a girl. But I remember going in that stadium. It was quite large and quite nice. It fell into disrepair and became such a rickety mess that they finally tore it down because they didn't even use it for baseball. By the time I was a teenager, nobody used that field. It was just out there. But you're right. So very interesting bringing up Lynn Ruby.
I must say that it is easier these days to become a broadcaster than it was back in the old days because I literally had to take a test to become a broadcaster, and it was not an easy test. I flunked it once before I was able to pass and get a broadcasting license. You had to have the license to be able to sign off on the transmitter logs and take readings of the transmitters.
Or even be legal on the air, to actually go on the air. It was a third class. It was called Third Class Radio Operators Permit.
I wonder where mine is. I've got to find that piece of paper somewhere around this station. It's stuck on the wall.
We used to have to, you had to not only have a license, you had to have it posted in order for the and everybody who was on the air, you had to do that because FCC inspectors would come in and anybody and everybody who, was involved in on-air work had to have that license posted publicly. So we all had our licenses out there and you had to pay for it. It wasn't free.
I had to go to Lubbock to take the test. I remember it.
And then over the years, it got easier and easier. They dropped the test, and you simply had to fill out the paperwork and pay your money and have your license, and then you had to renew it every so often. Then they dropped the renewal, and then they dropped the requirement to have that license altogether, except for as a broadcast facility, the station itself continues to have to be licensed and jump through an awful lot of hoops and red tape and paperwork and everything. But the individual people on the air, now you just walk in, and if you walk in and you crack the mic, you're a broadcaster. So it has changed, remarkably over that time. But
I'll say, we were still playing vinyl records when I started out in the 70s, and the 45s, people hopefully still remember 45s, and the cue burns on them. The cue burns is where you have set the needle on the record so many times and run it back and forth so that you got it close. So when you started the record player, the music would be right there.
Oh, yeah.
And you would run that back and forth to get it good and tight, and it would just chew up the records, and it would make hideous noises And when I hear that now, I'm like, how would anyone have ever listened to that?
Yeah, you had to replace the records from time to time when the cue burn got so bad. If you could, if you have, if they would let you, if there was budget, to be able to buy a new version of that.
Well, thankfully, the record companies in those days would send you two or three copies of a single most of the time.
Yeah.
But that's one of the most vivid memories I have when I would be out front filling out the commercial logs. They would leave the door open in the control room where they were running the shows, and you would hear this clank, 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 clank all the time.
Yeah.
It was them literally throwing the 45 records in the bins back there. They would just chunk them in there, and, it wasn't like we treated them with kid gloves or anything. It was...
Yeah, we threw them around. I had the first station I worked, the program director there, it was KWEW, and that was the oldest station in Lee County. It was it was Walter E. Wentworth, I think, were the initials of the gentleman who started the oldest station in Lee County. And Harry McAdams was actually the general manager of that station. He's the one who hired me, gave me my first radio job. And I can't remember the name of the gentleman who was the program director. He did middays as well. And it was an AM, so it was a daytimer, and signed off at midnight. I think it came on at 6 a.m., and throughout the day, it was easy listening. It was Johnny Mathis, Barbra Streisand, Frank Sinatra, easy listening, and talk format, and news. And then at night, when the power went down, it was at full power during the day, and the power dropped down. They didn't really care. They just wanted to you had to keep something on the air, but it dropped down to you could just only hear it within the city of Hobbs. And so from then from like 7 till midnight, they programmed it differently. And it was top 40, and they just used interns. They used kids fresh out of broadcasting school or just young DJs. And as long as you didn't curse and you didn't have dead air, you kept music on, they really didn't care. And there weren't very many commercials that had to be played during that time, but you had to satisfy that. Do your legal IDs and sign everything off at midnight and turn off the transmitters. They didn't care. So the guy who was program director, the music came in, and it would be in these boxes. Everybody just kept all the 45s and then the big vinyl in these boxes that would sit around. And he would go through the songs records that were okay for nighttime. And his test was he would throw them on the turntable and drop the needle at some point somewhere in them and listen for 10 seconds. And if he liked it, he picked it up and he threw it in the okay bin, the box. And if he didn't, he broke it over his knee so it could not be played, and it went in the trash bin. So it was either break it or make it, literally. And so it's funny. The different standards, the different ways that stations operated and how that has changed over the years is interesting.
Actually, KZOR, what is KZOR now, the original call letters for it were KPOE.
Really?
Yes, and I could not tell you where those call letters came from.
Okay. I believe I was told at one point that was the POE was the last name, the maiden name of the wife of the man who owned the station at the time.
But it started out as beautiful music.
Okay.
It was elevator music.
Yeah.
And everybody would call it, because at that time I was still in my early 20s, and beautiful music, KPOE, everybody called it K-Pooey.
Yeah, or worse, right? Yeah. I'm sure, yeah. So while it was out there at Humble City, it went from being just an AM station to adding the FM with it.
Right.
Isn't that right?
Right.
And the FM it went on as
Giant
100,000.
reel-to-reel tapes is what we played on it for a lot of years.
Even out there at the...
Yes. It began as beautiful music on the reel-to-reels.
Okay.
And then we went to a cart system and some reel-to-reels.
Okay.
And when we moved it into town, into Hobbs and these studios,
at 619 North
still reel-to-reels, and the commercials were on what we call
Carts.
Look like 8-track cartridges, but they're just a single track.
So when did the format change, or when did it go from playing beautiful music to...
that it didn't stay beautiful music, but perhaps a year. It was in 75 or 76 that we went to to the rock format, if you will. Of course, disco was just starting to take hold in the 70s there. So we had I can remember when Donna Summer came out, and it was big for us.
Oh yeah. When you started, you made mention of this a few minutes ago. When you in high school, when you received that injury, what year in school were you when you broke your? You were in the football game, broke your neck.
Junior in high school.
Okay, yeah. And what was the immediate result of that of the accident? What happened? You were hospitalized, or did you?
Yeah, I was in Lubbock for a month and a half.
Okay.
Before they had just opened a rehab hospital in Roswell. The state had.
Okay.
And they used the old Walker Air Force Base hospital out there and started a state rehabilitation hospital.
Right.
So I stayed at the hospital there for, I guess maybe 6 months or thereabouts, and started back to school on my senior year in Lovington.
You were able to do that? You were able to go to and attend classes.
Oh yeah,
go
my
ahead
senior
and go
year
on
did,
campus.
Yeah.
You
I was
went ahead and
tutored for
up.
my junior year and able to go ahead and get enough credits to be a valid senior at Lovington High School.
What did that do in terms of you thinking about your future? Before that happened, what did you think you were going to be doing out of school? Did you have an idea what you were going to study?
I can't say that I really had an. Well, I take that back. I did think about broadcasting when I graduated high school. As a senior, a friend of ours actually had an airplane and flew me down to New Mexico State, who at the time had a very good broadcasting. They actually had their own campus radio station and did a good job in journalism and radio broadcasting at New Mexico State in Las Cruces.
They still have a strong program there.
Yeah,
they still have.
I did not end up doing that. I elected to stay here and go to the junior college and get most of the electives and things out of the way there, and started out at Humble City.
And here you are. Certainly, broadcasting maybe because of physical limitations. Was this something that really?
Well, it seemed to be
definitely
fit,
was
yes.
a good fit. Was something that you already had a talent, an inclination for. Obviously, that had been spotted and mentioned to you, and something that you had thought about. I'm curious. Have you always sounded this way? Did you always have the Gary Sevier voice in high school, or no?
And I attribute some of that to one of the program directors that I worked with out at Humble City. Although I had maybe a year's experience on the air before he started working out there, there really wasn't anyone to say, okay, you do it this way, you do it that way, you say it this way. It's get, for, the, and not the, for, and W, and just kind of set me out on that path and cleaned up my diction so that I was speaking, coherently. And then Dave Williams, I guess, is one of the guys that I patterned myself after. He had such a strong voice and just a calm, easy delivery. He was... And he radio was so easy for him. He was a musician at heart, though.
Right.
He wanted to play in a band and be a musician, and radio just paid the bills while he was trying to make that happen. But I patterned myself a lot after him as far as his delivery and his tone.
Right. Well, it's funny. I didn't know that you knew Dave. He worked at KWW when I did, when I was hired. And I was just a kid and very impressed. And Dave, you're right. He carried himself. He had that easiness in his life. He was pretty much like he was on the air, off, except that he definitely he jocked it up just a little bit, But in terms of his personality, his ease, he had that naturalness about him that made him pleasant to listen to. He not only had a good voice,
he was a great talent. He worked in Houston, in the big markets a lot, but he just wanted to be a musician.
And he was in a band. He did play,
yeah.
And he just couldn't make a living at being a musician, but that was his love. And he knew country music really well. He knew music, period, but country music was really near and dear to his heart. And he ended up working when those stations, KWW was bought by Bob Flott and turned into KUUX. So we called it KWX. And Dave stayed on for a period of time, and he was able. The station went country format, And he really reveled in that. I do remember, though, Dave, some of the deepness of Dave's voice was due to the fact Dave smoked.
Oh, yeah.
And that back in the day, back in radio, that's one of the significant changes is that probably half or more of the people who worked in radio, especially on-air people, smoked. And you could smoke in the studios. And most of the time, if there was a window or a fishbowl effect like we have in our studios here, you would not be able to see the people inside the studio because the wall of smoke, it was like fog. You could actually, I think, open the door and cut it with a knife, cut a block out and move it in order to see people in there.
Yeah, I mean, you could smoke anywhere, but I can remember doing sports broadcast with Lynn Ruby. He smoked also. Right. And, I mean, he had it down to a science. He'd be calling the game, and he'd be able to get out a cigarette, light it, smoke the whole thing, and never miss a beat while he's broadcasting a football or a basketball game. I mean, you could smoke right inside the arenas. You know, it was like,
yeah.
But he would smoke and never miss a beat.
And a lot of that, some people were already smoking when they got into broadcasting, and some took it up. A lot of the men, I'm told, and maybe women too, although, you know, women in broadcasting was not very prevalent until really the 80s. You started seeing more, mid to late 80s, you started seeing more women infiltrate broadcasting. But it was rather rare. I was thinking so. But the men actually would smoke on purpose sometimes because they wanted to that gravelly. They wanted to deepen their voice, and it would change your voice, your vocal cords. It would change that, and so a lot of them either smoked or smoked heavier, or used that as an excuse, I think, in order to sound different on the air and to have a different voice. But I know throughout the years here, you might want to. And if you've just joined us, we're this is a media meeting, and it's a special hour-long edition of Media Link. Well, close to it. We'll have about 50 minutes, and so we have about 15 minutes left to talk. This is a media meeting, and our guest is Gary Sevier, longtime broadcaster in Lee County and for these stations at Noalmark Broadcasting. And I'm Dawn Morgan, your host, and just kind of reliving, talking about the history, Gary's history in broadcasting, particularly. He's in his 41st year of broadcasting, and I think that is a remarkable milestone. How do you feel about that when you say, and people say 41 years, man, Gary, that's crazy, or that's really cool, or that's pretty impressive. What do you think, looking back on?
I think I've been lucky to have found an occupation where you enjoy going to work. You know, it's not. People say, well, you got to go to the old job today. Well, you know, I didn't really have that attitude. I kind of looked forward to what might happen today whenever you go to work. So, and it's not a difficult job as far as sweat labor is concerned. So, you know. Yeah.
It is. It's a fun way to make a living. People often say, gosh, it sounds so much fun. I always say, if we're doing it right, that's how it should sound. It should sound like we're just having a great time and there's no work involved. But to make it sound that way, you have to do an awful lot of work beforehand, usually. You have to do, and I don't know about you, but I think that the broadcasters who are of maybe our generation and older have had a far different proving ground and training ground coming up through the years. And it's not brain surgery. You know, this isn't brain surgery, and it's not breaking rocks. But there's a certain talent, there's a certain skill, there's a certain level of what experience will bring and allow you to bring to the table every time you open the mic that differs from someone who is just new to broadcasting and hasn't had any kind of background in either journalism or communications or, you know, areas that help inform you as a broadcaster. There are broadcast schools still, and people are going into them and graduating 2 years later and coming out and looking for jobs and getting jobs sometimes. But it's a different world, and I think it's not necessarily better or worse, but I do sometimes think that what we went through to become broadcasters made us better broadcasters than what you're seeing today in terms of people on the air.
It is so much easier for us these days than it was back when. But back in those days, you literally had to sit. If your shift was 4 hours, you were glued to that baby for 4 hours. Yeah. And you heard every song. Oh, you knew the words to
yeah.
every song. If somebody called up and said, that song where he says blah, 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 and it's bingo, you knew just exactly the song they were talking about.
Right.
And that's maybe not so much true these days
Right.
as it was back in the old days when you really had to sit with it for hours and hours on end.
And carefully plan your bathroom break.
Exactly. The long plays.
Exactly. Find the longest.
If it had been a long, hard night back in the younger days, maybe you partied a bit too much and came in early if you were doing the morning show the next day, and you'd try to find a long record to just kind of sit back and get your wits about you again.
And then plan for those. Have your stash of long songs that you knew you had time to run down the hall and take care of things and come back, and without having your record run out and have dead air. And so much has changed, in that sense over the years. What really stands out? You've working 41 years in Hobbs and Lovington, in one area for one. Not one company, but for the most of this, it's been one company or what really stands out in your mind? You've worked for a lot of people, had a lot of different bosses, owners. You've worked with a lot of different people, and what are some of the things that really stand out in your mind? Maybe colorful stories or episodes or people that were either that
you take a little bit, I think, from everyone who crosses your path. And some people would say, when I was maybe 10 or 15 years into it, you really sound good. You should go to a major market. You should go to Dallas or go out to California or something. But I really never considered that seriously, because there were so many people that would come in and out through the radio stations or just through Hobbs itself. And I contribute part of that, too, to the oil booms in the late 70s and 80s. I mean, there were a huge influx of people from all different walks of life who would come through the town. And we had a lot of eccentric, weird guys, if you want to, that came through the radio station over the years as well, too. I mean, we earlier talking about people trying to distract you while you're on the air. That's one of the all-time classics in radio, is trying to break somebody up.
Right.
Well, we actually brought a stripper in for one of the guys' shows. Well, It was his birthday.
Oh, okay.
So we brought a stripper in, and we have open windows into the studios where you can look out into the hall. And we brought her in, and we acted like she was just someone who'd come in to have a tour of the station, and we waited until he was on the air, and then she whips her top off in front of him, and we actually got him with that one.
Oh man, yeah, and I'll bet. What was payback? Did he retaliate with something? Anything that you can talk about?
That one was just too good. He could never top that one.
Okay. That is a pretty good one. Did you ever try that with anybody else, or is that a one-time only thing?
The one time.
Okay. Yeah, and it's just it's great when you can think about over the years and having a good time, and that's what it is. It's a lot of work. People don't realize that it is a lot of work in terms of, and we use so much. I think there's so much of the creativity that gets used, and mental. Mentally, you're busy a lot. You may be sitting so much in the studios or sitting and talking, but it creates, I think, this need for that break, to break things up and to have create something, a diversion even for yourself, And so I think that's where a lot of some of the craziness comes from, is because
too much time on our hands.
Too much time, and maybe it's just that need for release, because you're concentrating, you're thinking, you're doing. There's so much mental work, involved, and like I said, it's not brain surgery. I don't mean to make it sound like it's tougher than it is, but it's also not as easy as it sounds,
No, I mean, most people who think you just sit down and take off, well, you're going to get off to a slow start. And a lot of it is the mechanics of knowing what you're doing with your hands and trying to think with your head and say with your mouth all at the same time. And, once you get those things down, it becomes a little easier. But in the beginning, it can be a daunting experience.
And now there's really less of that. Spatially, it's different. There's still the same concept of doing that, doing several things at once or in tandem. But with the lack of turntables now and cart machines, to physically have to think about reaching, doing, moving, and doing that kind of, it's a ballet of sorts with your body. It's an orchestration of things. And once you get it down, it becomes rote. But you're right. The learning process, and there's still really no. It's trial by fire. Now we have the capability of pre-recording certain things, and we generally do a combination of live and recorded elements now, and so a lot of broadcasters are getting their start not live at all, and a lot of times not being live for a long time. So you kind of have a little training grounds, training wheels more than you used to. But man, there was not any way to practice being live on the air.
No.
You just can't. It is what it is,
No.
and you have to learn. And it is trial by fire.
You can rehearse that line 10 times
Sure.
when you're a beginner and open up the microphone and spit it out wrong.
I remember one of the worst faux pas was when the first Gulf War started, and we were still an Associated Press affiliate then, and so our news came in, not on the big teletype. By that time, it was a small printer, but the phrase was about the war beginning, and I flubbed it totally. I remember at the time it was. And you can never go back and redo those, I mean, you get a one time to do your first time at anything, and it either goes well and it was great and memorable,
Yes.
or you screw it up and it's forever, imprinted on your memory and a lot of other people's as well. But it's an interesting way to make a living, and it's the way that you have made a living for 41 years now. And enjoyed most of the time. Without a doubt, any job comes with the good and the bad. No place is a picnic all the time, and so it's a combination. I know.
Yeah, there are days when it does seem like a job, but there are fewer, I think, in this occupation than they may be in others.
Well, I think that you should be in the New Mexico Broadcasters Hall of Fame, and not just for sticking around for 41 years. It's the body of work that what you've brought to broadcasting, and to me have enhanced broadcasting and done a variety of things, from starting at the ground with traffic and administrative, clerical, on up, working, learning to be on the air, doing sports, doing commercials, doing every air shift you can imagine, just about every time slot on all different kinds of formats of playing different music as well as news talk, and doing all of that, and helping teach and train and mentor others too. That has been a part of your legacy, your career, and your legacy as well. And I would hope and think that that's probably one of the things that you look back on and are proud of.
I've had a lot of experiences. Yeah, I mean, I don't feel like I've left too much laying on the sideline. Or I gave it my best shot for 41 years so far.
Is there anything left that you haven't done? You have a regret, or that you never did, or always wanted to do that never got a chance to, or passed it up, or anything like that?
I cannot think of a thing. No, I've pretty much done it all.
So what's the future? How long?
I don't
how
know.
long do you want to be in broadcasting?
I am entertaining thoughts of retirement, but I've not yet sat down with a piece of paper and said, I want to do this, or I want to do that, or this is how I want to spend my time. I haven't really taken it that far yet. I'm an avid gardener and outside, but in the winter months, what the heck are you going to do if you're retired? There's not much to do in the winter months around here as far as that is concerned. But
if you retire full time, is this something? Radio is something that a lot of people do, even part time now, or they do you can do things from a great distance. Never leave your studio. You can do. A lot of people have a home studio where they do just voice production, or
and that's where I'm not sure. Right now, I'm thinking when I retire, I want to retire. I don't want to work anymore. I don't want to do anything. But I'm sure after a while that's going to get old, and I may start to miss it and come back to it then. But right now, I'm thinking, like the guys who say you got to know when it's time to quit and just walk away.
Yeah.
All the ball players
Okay.
so I don't really know yet what the future holds.
Well, I think people who know you well and know you and your wife Connie now, and you guys have a grandbaby, right? Two grandchildren. Wow. And know that you've made your home in Lovington for a number of years, and are real parts of the community. You're not just about going to work. You and Connie have been part of the fabric of Lovington now, and for a long time, and active and giving back to the community as well. I'm going to embarrass you a little bit, but there are a few people more generous than Gary. Whether it's just to do a favor. You've given me more than one ride, many of times. You've helped when I've had ailing cars and things. And whether it's a small favor you need or whether it's a larger favor, Gary has been a true friend to many, many people in the station and outside in the community. And, I talked about your mentoring and helping teach others and help others. Personally, I know this is something that we've just touched on briefly, but I think it's about who you are, your character. You have also helped a number of people who have had debilitating injuries and have had to cope with that or help. And I know that you have done some of that counseling in your life, have you not? I
have, and I enjoy that. I mean, I've made a lot of mistakes and learned over the years, and if I could make it easier for somebody else, it's just a quick phone call and a little bit of good information can save somebody a lot of hardship. And so I enjoy that kind of thing.
Well, it's commendable, just the work that you've done, and the charitable acts, the kindnesses, the small favors, the big favors, the generosity. It's not just about your career in broadcasting. It's about the totality of it. So congratulations.
Well, thank you.
You're the one supposed to be tearing up over all this. I'm over here. I'm making myself cry. So it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure working with you all these years. And that's just, it seems a long time, to me. And I've just known you for, a part of that time and worked with you. So it's a pleasure. And I hope that we, are able, I hope you don't retire too soon, because I can't imagine you've worked here. You were here when I started here, and it would be it's hard to think that that you wouldn't be here one day. And I may leave before you do. They may fire me tomorrow, so we may not. You may outlast me.
I've lived my life. I've lived it, so I have no regrets over the 40 years. It's been fun.
Well, good. It has been fun, and here's to not 41 more, but maybe a few more. Gary, we've talked about some memorable things, that have happened, and funny things and stories. But I'd like to know what is the number one or some of the most important things, or the things that you're proudest of, accomplishments when you're looking back on your years in broadcasting. What are the big things that stand out?
It's hard to pick one or to even think of something after 40 years. I don't know, Don.
If somebody had to say your shining moment, or the one that you would say that, it's the tombstone moment, what do you want engraved? What represents maybe, your best time, or the highest accomplishment or achievement, or something that you're really proud of, that you'd like to be known for? And maybe it's not an incident. Maybe it's something else. When you think of what do you want to be known for?
I can't really pin down one certain thing. I guess maybe it's just the consistency.
Okay.
I have, and I would hope that is how people think of when they hear me on the radio, is that calm, assured, like in times of when things are going on, say a tornado, bad weather, or a national catastrophe, I would like to think that I would be the one voice that they would like to go and hear what's happening, without It's hard for me to
Yeah.
pick any one thing.
Okay.
I really can't not think of one.
I think that's entirely fair, and I think that's probably that's interesting because I think you want to be you talked early on about thinking of having an idol, so to speak, a Dave Williams, and wanting that calm demeanor, that easiness, but a trust, I guess. You build up a trust with listeners, and you want to feel like they can trust you and come and listen and know that what you're saying is the truth and are helping them. I guess it all comes down to we all kind of want to help people.
Actually, there was, and maybe it epitomizes it better than I can express it, a guy who went away to college and came back home now and then again. I ran across him. This has been years ago. And he said, you know what? I don't ever feel like I'm back home until I turn the radio on and you're on the radio. He said, then I feel like I'm back at home.
Perfect. Well, any last thoughts or words about listeners?
No. I've probably said too much already.
All right. Well, we couldn't do what we do without listeners. I mean, it's a one-way street. We're just sitting here talking to air until someone turns on the radio and listens to us. And so it's a pleasure to do what we do, and I thank you for doing what you do. And I'm sure the many friends, the many listeners that you have over the years, I think when you think of radio in Lee County, you can't think of radio without thinking about Gary Sevier.
I'm honored. Thank you.
You're welcome. And this has been Media Meeting. Thank you for listening. And this program is on each week on this station. It's brought to you by Baja Broadband. Connect to Life. I'm Dawn Morgan. Thank you again, Gary Sevier, our guest on this program today.